Well, speaking of COVID-19, you must have some further thoughts and recommendations. We referenced this earlier. Everything has changed. This is seismic, right? Staff have remote working arrangements, online learning, or remote learning actually is the better phrase for it. Admissions deadlines being changed from May 1st to June 1st. On-campus and off-campus events, the budgeting process being completely blown up by this, including public funding. Students' ability to pay. You must have some thoughts and recommendations about technology, its risks and rewards, particularly in the environment of C-19. Thoughts about that?
Yeah, so I think as hard as it's going to be, the first thing we do is take a deep breath, but not a long one. And we have to walk. We cannot avoid this, obviously. Most campuses aren't. But when I think about some of the press releases I saw, that was sort of suggested with the wave of the digital wand will solve this problem. Remote learning is not online learning. This is kind of bolted on at best with flour paste glue for some folks. How do you do that? How do you provide support for that? How do you do training and infrastructure for that? I think that some advocates and evangelists will say, this is a crisis, is a terrible thing to waste. For some faculty members, it will be the catalyst to say, okay, I've got to confront and master some of these tools that I've avoided for a period of time. But that doesn't solve the larger problem. We're going to have to deal with issues about how do we deal with what we have to call the lost term, in terms of what's going on, the conversations about pass-fail that are going on in both K-12 and higher ed in terms of the term ahead. How do we deal with that instructional experience and doing those assessments? How do we do planning for the fall? Because not only has the instructional infrastructure been overwhelmed just trying to play catch up now, but for the faculty members who are planning courses, and how do they retool those courses based on both this experience and the unknown of what we have to do for fall 2020. What's opening going to look like? What's orientation going to look like? How are campuses going to deal with the finances on this? There's one part of that for the room and board operations. Are they going to give back on tuition? We don't know. And there's just, the question about where and how we know and who's affected. This will be the conversation we were having before March 1st about some campuses at risk about closing. That's going to be accelerated. We're seeing the announcement about campus closings already. What about part-time faculty at greater risk? These are the gig employees in higher ed, gig economy employees, who are being asked to do even more work than they normally do for a pittance. Actually, the one thing I would say is, as campus leaders go forward, the tendency is going to be to cut, don't do it. Don't whack the infrastructure. If anything, figure out how to invest more in the infrastructure, because that instructional infrastructure is going to be essential. Now,
well, actually, it's interesting, because one of the things I was thinking about while you were talking was whether or not there might be a greater tendency to look these days at the ROI for technology investments. I mean, ROI, I don't have to tell you, it's a dirty word in the context of most higher ed institutions. And, to your last point about don't whack the infrastructure, do you think ROI becomes a more important part of the conversation?
It does, but the fact is, this is like testing for the virus. It's too late in many ways. We have done a terrible job of assessing our ROI. Our survey data says that maybe 1/5 of campuses do any kind of evaluation of their IT initiatives, whether they're classroom innovations or other kinds of things. So all of a sudden say, wait a minute, we have to stop and do an ROI. We don't have a choice. Essentially, we have to use that bad metaphor. We're building the plane while we fly it. We're going to have to bake some of these in now as we go forward. But the fact is, we are going to be even more dependent upon some of these technologies. We're going to have to make thoughtful choices. And again, the tendency I fear at many campuses is say we're going to cut back. And my one statement is don't. Now more than ever, you have to invest in the infrastructure. Instructional support for faculty, user support for faculty, students, user support for students, and other kinds of resources to the extent that campuses can provide them. It's Wi-Fi for off-campus populations who have dispersed, other kinds of instructional support, Chromebooks for students who don't have adequate platforms. All this is part of the challenges that we confront individually and collectively.
Well, great, Casey. Appreciate those comments.